There's been no charges filed in that
This is the legislative branch and the power
Hello, I'm Tom Hartman in Washington, D.C., and here's what's coming up tonight on The Big Picture. Economists and the media are warning that Donald Trump's plan to slap big tariffs on aluminum and steel could spark a trade war. Could that actually be a good thing? I'll ask Alan Tonelson in just a moment. And renowned physicist Stephen Hawking says that the Trump administration is pushing us past the point of no return on climate change. Why is the administration, and really the entire Republican Party, so willing to bring on the apocalypse just to help the fossil fuel oligarchs make a little more profit? We'll find out in tonight's Lone Liberal Rumble with Julio Rivera and Travis Corson. Just minutes before leaving for Europe, where he'll attend the G20 summit in Germany, Donald Trump doubled down on the kind of nationalist rhetoric that helped get him elected in the first place. He tweeted, "The United States made some of the worst trade deals in world history. Why should we continue these deals with countries that do not help us?" Coming as it did amid reports that he's considering a big 20% tariff on steel and other imports, Trump's tweet got the media talking once again about the possibility of a trade war. But what actually is a trade war? And would a confrontation with, say, China over trade policy really be such a bad thing? Joining me now is Alan Tonelson, economist, founder of Reality Check blog, and author of The Race to the Bottom: Why a Worldwide Worker Surplus and Uncontrolled Free Trade Are Sinking American Living Standards. Alan Tonelson, welcome back.
Great to be here. Thanks for having
you with us. So, first of all, what do we know about, or what do you know about this trade plan that Trump says he's promoting, or is this just more rhetorical flourish from the tweeter-in-chief?
There certainly has been a pattern. I don't want to say history, it's a little too soon for that, but there's been a pattern for sure of the Trump trade bark being somewhat worse than the actual bite. And we might be seeing this in the case of the steel tariff controversy, since the administration was due to come out with a report about the national security implications of America's steel trade patterns, its rising imports, its growing trade deficits in steel. Again, that was supposed to come out last Friday. It was announced at the last minute that the release of this report, which was going to precede the presumed announcement of steel trade tariffs of some kind, that report was then pushed back, its release, until after this week's G20 meeting with the leaders of the world's other 19 big trade and economic powers. So that's possibly one sign that either the administration is having second thoughts about the whole thing, or that they're trying to figure out which countries get hit and which don't.
Yeah, I would suspect the latter.
That's probably not a bad bet.
Yeah, okay. It's my understanding that there's a big debate within the administration about the possibility of imposing tariffs, particularly on China.
Right.
Who were the players in this debate, and what were their positions?
From what's reported in the press, and I think this time it's probably accurate, you've got the so-called populists, the Steve Bannons, the Steve Millers, who is the chief domestic policy aide. You've got Peter Navarro, who has been heading the National Trade Council, possibly Wilbur Ross, the Secretary of Commerce, on the side of much harder line trade policies. Opposing them, again, presumably, is the so-called Goldman Sachs gang. Gary Cohn, who is the former chief executive at Goldman Sachs, who now heads the National Economic Council, and Steve Mnuchin, another Goldman Sachs alum, the Treasury Secretary. Of course, Steve Bannon worked for Goldman Sachs too.
Yeah, although he was not like, a major senior executive in decision. Yeah, he was just a trader. So, well, that's interesting. As I mentioned, the media is talking about this.
There's one more faction, and it's very important, that's very strongly against any steel trade tariffs, and that's the national security crowd. General McMaster, the national security advisor, General Mathis, the Secretary of Defense, I would imagine Rex Tillerson, former Exxon chairman, now Secretary of State.
Is this
I'm
because
sure they hate this idea.
They see steel tariffs as raising the price of steel. Raise the price of steel, you raise the cost of manufacturing weaponry. And we're one of the largest manufacturers in the world of weaponry, one of the largest purchasers of it, so it's going to jack up the DoD budget.
I have a feeling that they're much more concerned with the prospect that one hears from all wings of the American foreign policy establishment, that whenever America moves to either promote or safeguard its legitimate economic interests, which I strongly believe to be the case with steel, that's risky national security-wise because other countries might become upset.
Oh, geez.
Which is an argument that I simply don't buy, if only because when it comes to national security, all America's allies need the United States much more than vice versa.
Right. And I realize that's ahistorical, and all these attempts to, for example, portray Smoot-Hawley as the cause of the Great Depression, the cause of World War II, are just total nonsense. But is there an historical precedent for? I mean, the United States started out protectionist. This was Hamilton's whole thing. You know, in 1791 and 1793, put it in place, 11-point plan, and it basically stood until at least Nixon in a strong way.
I'd say it actually stood until the 1930s when President Roosevelt initiated a series of tariff cuts inspired by Cordell Hull, his then Secretary of State, with the idea being that that Smoot-Hawley, the tariff that the United States had put on shortly after the Great Depression actually broke out, had made things much worse. We had to reverse course, and so I would actually date the start of free trade America to that 1930s period.
Yeah, but Smoot-Hawley only raised tariffs by 3-4%.
Oh, there were so many factual arguments against it, not least of which was it also only affected a very tiny percentage of total U.S. trade flows.
Right, right. Yeah, it was less than
but
1%.
It's a convenient whipping boy.
Yeah. So back to the historic. I mean, if the history of the United States has been we were mercantilist and protectionist for the first 150 years or so, and then we slowly have become more free trade. I don't know what the word is for this. You know, I guess surrendering economic sovereignty.
Well, in some respects, yes.
Has there been a time in the United States history where we have returned back to those Hamiltonian principles? And if so, what was the outcome?
Well,
I don't know of such a time.
Strangely enough, it came, and I was just thinking about this just before tonight's show, because we're at a very similar moment today. Former President Nixon, back in the early 1970s, saw that the United States was increasingly incapable of playing its traditional global leadership role when it came to national security, while remaining wide open to every other country's exports, especially those of its allies, Japan and also Germany. And he essentially imposed in 1971 a 10% tariff, which he called a surcharge, which was intended to get those countries to strengthen their currencies. They were being charged with what we would call today currency manipulation, and it largely worked. He also, though, and again, this is very ironic, brought down the post-World War II economic system, which was a very strongly U.S. dollar-based system related to the dollar's convertibility to gold. And we're getting very wonky here, I know, but
71 when he closed the gold.
Right, exactly. That was in place since the late 1940s. Nixon brought that down because the strains that it imposed on the U.S. economy were getting excessive in his judgment, and U.S. allies were free riding economically and also national security-wise.
Right. So first of all, steel. If I was thinking national security, in the 19th century, or maybe even the first half of the 20th century, I'd think steel.
Sure.
But right now, when I'm thinking national security, I'm thinking the United States can't make a cruise missile without chips from China.
Right. Electronics is so terribly important.
Why are we not looking at, I mean, you walk through government offices in this town, and I have over the years, and you see you know, miles of computers manufactured
Sure.
in Japan or in China, rather.
Yes, that's right.
And you know, how can we have national security when our critical government functions are being done on computers that are manufactured in China? We don't know what's in their EPROMs.
Clearly, that's been a big blind spot that that previous administrations, both Democratic and Republican, can be legitimately accused of. One big reason that steel has been chosen first, and I don't think it will be last, is because steel is just about the only major American industry that has decided to keep most of its production capacity at home. Whereas the U.S. electronics industry has gone overseas, and the last thing it wants is trade barriers. But there is a very legitimate case, a national security case, for imposing steel tariffs, because even though steel does not play the role in America's defense that it clearly played in decades past, specialty steels remain critically important to a wide variety of U.S. weapon systems. And even though their production volumes are pretty small, they're so vital that you need a larger steel infrastructure, a larger steel industry to support their manufacture. You can't just expect niche products like that to survive without a larger infrastructure, and that's what the steel industry has been saying.
Yeah. The other, we have about a minute and a half, Alan. The other big argument against the Trump administration doing this is that it'll spark a trade war, and that a trade war implicitly could lead to a hot war. What are your thoughts?
Right. Well, I don't see a trade war leading to a hot war with the U.S. security allies like Japan and Germany and South Korea. In theory with China, but China is such a rogue state when it comes to economics, when it comes to trade policy. Something clearly has to be done. There's pretty strong bipartisan support because Democrats like Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, have been chiding Trump. You're too weak on China. You're breaking your campaign promise. You have to do more. So I think that if he took more aggressive steps, he would get, even in this climate, strong support. And I can't imagine the Chinese responding militarily. It just makes no sense whatever.
Yeah, yeah. What, and if there were some sort of a flashpoint in that region, say North Korea, this could be very sticky.
The more direct U.S.-China flashpoint is in the South China Sea,
the Spratly Islands,
where China has been trying to expand its own territorial reach. The U.S. Navy has been pushing back. Things are at a very touchy point right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, great having you.
What a pleasure. Thanks
so much. Coming up, Republicans say they believe in local control, but they don't actually mean it. Proof in tonight's Lone Liberal Rumble with Julio Rivera and Travis Corson right after this break.
I think the average viewer, just after watching a couple of segments, understands that we're telling stories that our critics can't tell. And you know why? Because their advertisers won't let them. In order to create change, you have to be honest. You have to tell the truth. RT's able to do that. Every story is built on going after the backstory to what's really happening out there to the American public. What's happening when a corporation makes a pharmaceutical that kills people? When a company in the environmental business ends up polluting a river that causes cancer and other illnesses, they put all the health risk, all the dangers out to the American public. Those are stories that we tell every week, and you know what? They're working.
I'm Wolf Blitzer, you're in the situation. I'm now for the ridiculous.
Elect Republicans and they will burn the place down.
This is my problem with liberals.
I'm the resident. Let's talk about that.
What politicians do is something we don't do. They put themselves on the line, and they get accepted or rejected. So when you want to be president, why would you want to be? Why would someone want to be president? What's it like to be president? What's it like when the phone rings at 3 in the morning? Can't be a good call. I'm interested always in the whys and the hows.
And Q Larry.
Question more.
Republicans talk an awful lot of game about clamping down on welfare queens, but the truth is they're perfectly fine with using taxpayer dollars to subsidize people who don't deserve our help, just so long as those people happen to be billionaire corporate CEOs. Let's rumble. With me for tonight's Lone Liberal Rumble are Julio Rivera, editorial director at Reactionary Times, and Travis Corson, senior vice president at Madison Strategies. And thank you both for being with us tonight.
Glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Great, let's get started. Missouri Republicans have lowered the minimum wage. That's right, lowered it. On Friday, Missouri's right-wing governor, Eric Greitens, allowed the Show Me State's version of what's known as a preemption law to go into effect. This law bans cities in Missouri from raising their minimum wages higher than $7.70. It was a direct response to St. Louis having raised its minimum wage to $10 an hour. St. Louis workers will now see their wages drop from $10 to $7.70 an hour, a 23% pay cut. A study out of the University of California, Berkeley found earlier this year that low wages cost U.S. taxpayers $152.8 billion each year in public support for working families. So here's my question for you guys. Why are Republicans trying to keep working people tied to food stamps and public assistance? I know why corporations like this scam. They don't have to pay higher salaries, and you and I, all three of us, are with our tax dollars subsidizing Walmart and McDonald's and all these other companies. But I don't get why Republican politicians like that.
Let's get something straight here. A higher minimum wage does not necessarily translate to a better worker outcome. And I think there's a philosophical difference here in the minimum wage and entry-level jobs and what they mean. Republicans, conservatives believe entry-level jobs are just that, a stepping stone on a way up the ladder, an opportunity to work your way up. By raising the minimum wage, you actually lessen the amount of jobs that are available to these lower workers. You lessen their abilities for higher outcomes, and a lot of times you're pricing them out and you price automation instead of actual workers.
You know, I hear all that, and I know the shtick, but the fact of the matter is that a majority of the workers in most of these low-wage industries are not kids. They're not teenagers. They're people who have families. They're people who are, in some cases, working 2 and 3 jobs. They're adults, number one. Number two, you didn't address why Republicans who are always talking about local control, particularly when it comes to racial issues like their schools and school integration and stuff like that, are all of a sudden saying, "Oh no, cities cannot have control. It's got to be coming from the geniuses at the state down. Period." And number three, nobody addressed, Julio, you're next, nobody addressed my pointing out that this scam has been going on for about 20 years now, where the guys at Walmart and the guys at McDonald's, they've figured out if we pay at this level, then all of our employees qualify for government benefits, which takes them essentially up to this level in terms of total income when you add in food stamps and housing support and everything else and Medicaid. But if we pay just $3 more than that, they no longer qualify for these things, and now they're going to demand them from us.
Actually, Tom, the University of Washington did a study using Seattle, the first city to fight for 15 as the guinea pig, and they actually found that workers worked less hours than they did before the minimum wage increase and actually saw a net decrease in wages. So a net decrease in wages
Travis,
because they're working less hours.
As I'm sure both of you know.
So they're actually more dependent on the government because they're making less money than before.
We're talking about McDonald's and Walmart, and as I'm sure both of you know, that study done by the University of Washington did not look at any large employers. It was entirely small businesses. So
but they looked at specifically low-wage earners who this legislation is supposed to help, and that was when they took it.
No, wait a minute. This legislation is supposed supposed to this decision, this legislation by the governor and the legislature in Missouri is supposed to hurt. It dropped the minimum wage in St. Louis from $10 to $7.
You're not letting me finish. In general, when you raise the minimum wage, obviously they're trying to help the low-wage worker. But as
St. Louis
Travis pointed out, the University of Washington study actually confirmed that they lost hours. They lost 9% of the total hours in low-wage jobs.
In a small group of small local employers.
Let's talk about those.
That does not indicate anything. And plus, that's a $15
What do you mean it doesn't indicate it? That's 9% of the hours gone.
Will somebody please address the issue
of jobs? Employers cut hours.
None of you guys are willing to talk about this scam that these billionaire oligarchs are running on all of us.
Let's talk about you talked about the study, how the study didn't include small employers, right?
It did not include large employers.
It does not include large employers. Well, guess what? The small employers are actually exempt from this law, this St. Louis wage law. You have to make over $500,000 and employ more than 15 employees to actually even be eligible to have to pay this $10 minimum wage. And you know why? Because they know it'll drive these small employers out of business. Small business, which is the backbone of this country.
Just got killed.
It didn't apply to these small employers anyways, though.
But okay. So both of you are fine with just blowing up the whole idea of local control, right? Cities should not have the ability to determine their own fate, even if it's a stupid fate. You're both on board with that?
Not necessarily. I mean, it just this is something stupid, though. I mean, a city can't make a decision for the employers and for the small businesses in that kind of a
Sure they can. They do every day.
way.
It's called zoning, if nothing else. Cities constantly making decisions about employers. I mean, that's the obligation of a city.
Yeah, but not on how much they're going to pay people as a minimum, no.
Sure.
I mean,
Washington, D.C. just raised the minimum wage to $15 here in D.C.
And guess what?
Well,
they've lost over 1,000 jobs.
Countries. That's, if you want to keep on with that,
if a city
eventually, listen, you're worrying too much at the people.
I thought the Republican idea was
these jobs are kids. Like my teenage daughter
we're not talking about your teenage daughter.
$15 an hour. She should be making. Yeah, but these are the people that generally work these types of jobs. There's younger people entering the workforce, people, that
has been so debunked. These are not young people entering the workforce. These are people trying to pay for their families.
A large percentage of them are.
No, a small percentage of them.
You can't strive for a minimum wage job. That shouldn't be what you're striving for.
So, number one, you guys are fine with no such thing as local control, unless it has to do with, presumably, integration of schools. And number two, you're saying that it's just fine with you that the three of us continue with our tax dollars to subsidize McDonald's and Walmart and all these other big companies in St. Louis and Missouri.
Tom, you just glossed over the fact that where the minimum wage is raised, these people make less money than they did before. So you're actually pushing them further down in the cycle of poverty.
They no longer qualify for government benefits.
If they make less money than they were making before?
No, if they make more than $10 an hour. That's why Obama was talking about a $10.15 or whatever it was minimum wage. It was exactly the point where employees no longer qualified for government benefits. I thought you guys didn't like government benefits. Raising the minimum wage to $10. We're not talking $15 minimum wage like in Washington State. This is $10. And St. Louis had already done this. It had been in place for years. And now the state comes along and says, no, you got to knock it down to $7.
That's not true.
We've got to impoverish these workers.
They sprung a 23% boost on these employers. This is something that just was in effect for a little over a month before the injunction came. This hasn't been in place for years. It was a 23% boost in their labor costs that they got blindsided with.
And so you're okay. So it's just $7.70 an hour is just fine with you. I'm just horrified by that. That's pathetic.
Because we're evil Republicans, right, Tom? Listen, the bottom line
you're
is
shilling for evil billionaires who own these companies.
You can't. All right, but how many people are out there really supporting a family on $7 an hour? These are entry-level jobs. I understand there's some people that
if you don't know
skilled, but the only thing that you're going to do is cut their
trying to do that, you
That's
are
what the
completely out of
studies show.
touch.
The data shows that they lose hours.
Tom, what we believe in is paying what the market demands. If the market will sustain a $10 wage, and there's no reason
the market will probably sustain a $4 wage. And by the way, if we do away with the child labor laws, you might even get a $3 wage with a 12-year-old. And I realize that's the direction Republicans want. Well, that is the absolute direction of this arrow. And anyhow, in an interview with the BBC this weekend, world-renowned physicist Stephen Hawking said that Donald Trump is pushing us past the point of no return when it comes to climate change.
Trump's action could push the Earth over the brink to become like Venus, with a temperature of 250 degrees and raining sulfuric acid.
Why are the petro-billionaires who virtually own the Republican Party willing to risk killing us all just to get a few more years of profit?
Listen, this is all demagoguery. It's nonsense. The bottom line is, if there's a volcanic eruption, somewhere, that'll do about 100 years worth of man-made damage. The fact is, even the CEO
Julio, don't try to
from
play
the
scientist.
Weather Channel denied climate change. It's
not anymore.
None of the climate change
Not anymore.
have ever been accurate.
The Weather Channel is totally down with climate change.
In the New York studios underwater right now, because there were so many models that said that Manhattan would be underwater. But, as far as I can tell, it's not.
I have to agree with Julio. The level of alarmism here is crazy. How do we go from the so-called accepted scientific consensus from those that claim climate change, and really it was global warming, but then they had to flip it back to climate change. How do we go from 4.8 degrees Celsius rise over the next 100 years to now Earth is going to be a 250 degree with sulfuric acid rain clouds? I just, the level of alarmism is just amazing.
Yeah, and even the.
So you guys are going to continue to push the Koch brothers shtick. You guys are both going to continue to push the petro-billionaires, the Koch brothers, the BP shtick. Nothing to worry about here. Yeah, the planet is warmed up.
Compliance, in order to follow the laws to be greener, just costs businesses money needlessly. It makes the cost of producing cars in our country more expensive. The cost of producing everything in our country more expensive.
Let's
also talk.
What are you blithering? Jose, what are you talking about? What makes things more expensive? Julio,
regulations, EPA regulations, complying with certain standards, that supposedly are making this huge difference.
Right, and seatbelts make cars more expensive too, right?
Even the accepted models of how hot it's going to get over the next 100 years, it's a wide range. It's between 1 degree and 6 degrees. These guys have no idea.
Not according to the
get
IPCC.
Yeah, it's between 1.6 and 5.8, I think.
Yeah, you're looking at
that's a far cry from 250 degrees.
Yeah, well, I'm not pitching
there's
Stephen
a big
Hawking
difference
here,
there.
but
Huge one.
Well, let's talk about the context in which this was brought up, and that was the context of the Paris Climate Accord, a voluntary accord, mind you, one that any country could leave at any time. If you really want to push change on this, the way to do it is to ratify a treaty through the Senate and do it the proper way, not the way the Obama did it, which was to unilaterally move something because you couldn't get the American public and American consensus on the issue.
Well, you're suggesting if you want something that's absolutely enforceable,
China's part of that.
Paris
you think
Agreement
China's really going to comply?
Yeah, actually, China's way ahead of their goals for Paris. They're way ahead.
That's because their goals are laughably low. They're still a developing country.
No, China is laying down more solar every month than we do in an entire year.
Yeah, guess what? They're building a new coal-fired plant every month, too.
No, they have cut back on that. China's canceled over 100 coal plants. They have canceled over 100 coal-fired power plants. So, anyhow, I'm missing a cue here. Julio Rivera and Travis Corson, thanks, guys, for being with me. And that's the way it is tonight. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it.